Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
We're bringing you part two of a two-part series on what I describe as the story of an immigrant Utah family during the particular 1800s. As a matter of fact, these three books that have been published deal with this special family from England to Africa, and they became converted to Mormonism in Africa and then came to Utah. And it's really about the women in this story, and particularly honoring the lady who did all of the writing for these books, Reva Yates Bignall. And her son is here, and his spouse, and we're very, very happy to welcome to the program Bliss and Annette Bignall, who edited the work of his mother and came out with these three books recently. We're very, very pleased to have you back from last week. It's very exciting to talk about this fabulous family. And I'm so pleased to have Janelle Burke, our regular panelist, with us this week. And we have a visiting panel member, and we're so pleased to have Kimberly Rice Brown, a historian, and she, among other things, is been the past president of the Post Office Historical Society. And Kimberly, you did a really great job last week, and welcome back. In fact, in introducing the second program for you who were not with us last week, I think to read from Kimberly Rice Brown's discussion of this book, or on the cover to the book, she says, Reva Bignall's 100-year family history sweeps across the velvet of South Africa to begin a universal journey of love, living, birth, and death with intuitive insight into English immigration, race relations, and early Mormonism in South Africa. She goes on to write, the immigrant journey across the Atlantic and westward journey to the Utah Territory provide the reader with vivid examples of hardship and adversity. References to Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, governmental relations established by non-Mormon Captain William Hooper as the territory's congressional representative, and early railroading pinpoint specific historical figures and events. With that, I will invite Janelle Burke to commence the questioning.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. We've known each other for a long period of time, a number of years, and I've had the opportunity to read the books and look at them, and they're very descriptive, and I might add for our audience, easy reads, so that they go quickly and they give you a lot of information. But I want to ask you about the long periods of time that people spent apart in those days, and how that was probably pretty regular in a lot of families. Someone had to leave and go somewhere. They couldn't just communicate like we do today.
Yeah, they had to leave and be gone so they could earn, the men could earn money for their families, so they could support their families. And everybody in those days was a farmer. So they would have planted the fields and then gone off, as, for example, in Western Argonaut, Tom Jessup went railroad building and left his wife home with all the children to take care of. And then, and then you think about the long periods of absence with Sandals of Service, the third book, where Frederick Yates served a mission in the South Sea Islands. Was gone for 3.5 years. With his wife had 4 children, and the 5th was born 2 weeks after he left. And then he left his younger brother, Israel, to help with the farm, because once again, the farm had been planted. All the crops were in, and so Israel did all that work, but Annie Francis had to do all the rest of the work at home, take care of the children, and did a tremendous amount of community service as well.
So they were very, very busy doing all of their work, and these periods of time that they were gone, the woman actually had to be quite a manager. Is that correct, Bliss? She had to be a manager both of her family and also of the business.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whatever that might be.
I told the staff I would start out with something, and I didn't. My staff is so flexible. I think before we go further and go to Kimberly for her questions too, we need to take a look at what books we're talking about. This is the first one that's come up on the screen, The Mothers. And there's a series of 3 of these books that have come out recently. And again, the artist you got is very creative on the cover of these books. The second one is called Western Argonaut, and here's what it looks like. And then the third and final book that we're discussing is Sandals of Service, which we have here. And I just wanted the viewers to see that. And with that, we'll go to Kim to continue the questioning.
Well, I want our viewers to really get excited about a little bit of Idaho history, because I think your mother, Bliss, did an excellent job in bringing in the railroad history and the building of the railroad. And I don't think there will be a time that I go down I-15 that I won't think about the work that went into a railroad grade. But for our local residents, it doesn't matter whether it's I-15 or whether it's some of the other railroading. When you think about grading, and that's what Tom Jessup was doing, building a railroad grade. And when we're all out on our mountain bikes going down these old railroad grades, we need to think about what I like is the immigrant story, the story of the men that worked with Tom Jessup, all the way from blacks to Italians to his Mormon friends. But it's the way in which he worked with men, I think, that impressed me, the way that he intertwined their needs, the importance of communicating back to families, the importance of working hard, and the importance of an employer being fair with his men. And I think I was very much impressed, I think, throughout all of these books with the intertwining of religion, where it's not talking the talk, it's walking the walk. So can you...
Well, I just think when you talk about railroad building in eastern Idaho, the Mormons were very happy for the railroads because they had 2 years of drought, and then the crickets came in and ate all our crops. And these were voracious little crickets. They weren't the grasshoppers you see in these movies. These were 3 inches by a half inch and devour everything in front of them. So the whole population in Utah was without work and without farms. So when the Transcontinental Railroad came through, and to the Wyoming line on one side and to the Nevada-Utah line on the other side, what really happened that they needed laborers because all the Irishmen on the Union Pacific weren't getting paid anything, and even the Chinese on Central Pacific basically decided to go to the gold field where the wealth was. And they came to Brigham Young and said, we need to build this railroad to connect it through Utah some way or other. And Brigham Young said, we'll make a deal here. I'll furnish the labor. But this, to the Mormon families, this was a godsend, so to speak, because they'd only had work during the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. But from there on, they took off in family and almost in community units as far as building railroads and so forth. And all through eastern Idaho, they built an awful lot of railroads connecting Salt Lake, Ogden, straight up to Butte area. And that's where you see most of the railroad construction. But every time he got out of a contract, they'd bid on 10-mile strips. He'd go back to Omaha. Now, this man was so well respected at the Union Pacific that they always had jobs for him. And once he refused to build a 10-mile strip, and he wasn't in charge of it, but he went back and told them that this railroad would go through, something like Sandpoint today, probably, in that area. And they said, we
the
tried.
grade was wrong.
The grade was wrong.
It had been plotted out by the
Yeah.
railroad's engineers. And
So-
the railroad would be destroyed right there if he built it where they wanted it to go.
But he was so respected by the Union Pacific officials that he had jobs all the time for his crew, whether it was in Pendleton, Oregon, where he built railroads, up in Spokane area, over to Wallace, and as I said in the prior deal, he was down at Benoit Lake. That's where they lost one of their men by drowning.
The other thing that happened in those days to all families across the West, well, all over the world, but there was a lot of sickness, and you didn't have the medical intervention to the extent you do today. Annette, would you take us through, in some of the publications, particularly the one on the mothers, tell us about some of the crises in the Bignall family, again, when with all the other challenges they had, and Bliss talked about the droughts and all. What were some of the diseases and some of the tragedies they faced?
Typhoid, diphtheria. Diphtheria was particularly a killer. And smallpox. In fact, Annie Francis, the third mother in the mothers, got smallpox at the moment that she was delivering Bliss's mother and the baby. Baby nearly died. The baby also was born with smallpox, or got it instantaneously, and nearly died from that. So that's Bliss's mother again. Then when the flu epidemic came along after World War I,
that was an incredible number of deaths from that.
yep, worldwide, the pandemic.
It was
right?
about 1920, I believe, somewhere around there.
1918 and 19, I believe
Okay,
it was.
okay.
But that is mentioned also there, how people were dying literally like flies everywhere. Somehow, Annie Francis and her family, even though they went out and called on all the people, and there was no quarantine, which is an unusual thing. For other diseases, the government had quarantined people, but they didn't for this flu pandemic. And so, but they, Annie Francis and her husband Fred, of Sandals of Service, the same way. He would call because he had quite an ability with medicine. There just weren't very many doctors around at all in those days. And so the people would call upon him to minister to them there in Millville and around, just as the natives had in Sandals of Service, had called upon him to help them in all their many illnesses that they had.
And so what happened in the stories here too, that families were so close-knit, and for you took care of your sick at home, and you served them best you could, but they were in very friendly, warm, and loving environments.
And you took care of all your neighbors too.
Yeah, it was very, very community-oriented. Janelle Burke.
Something that has always interested me, of course, is music, and music played a very big part in your family's growth and in their years, and they apparently were very skilled and very good musicians. Bliss, can you tell us about some of the musicians in your family?
I don't know what I should. I'm the only one that had any musical ability in my family or family. But it is amazing. I was mentioned in the first article, they were my grandmother and my great-grandfather, Grandfather Tom Jessup, sang on the streets of Spokane, he in his top hat, and she in her dress, to raise money to pay their workers that were working on a railroad down in Benoit County. That was one place. When they went back to Utah, at the time they were building the Salt Lake Temple, they were asked for money, and 4 singers, 2 of them came from Millville, I think, including Tom Jessup, went all over the Mormon districts raising funds for the Salt Lake Temple. They were that well as far as musicians are concerned. My younger sister, that doesn't mention this, took organ lessons from the director of the
Mormon Tabernacle
Tabernacle Choir. So there was some talent in the next generation down.
Well, you had different talent.
But basically, there was an interest in the arts that very much prevailed in these families of that time. And sometimes you think of them as having lived a rather bleak life, but in fact, there were many riches with art and music and literature.
Western Argonaut, the first 100 pages, takes Tom Jessup, who is the protagonist of that book, takes him from age 8 to 18 in England. And he was ready to matriculate in Oxford University when his benefactor suddenly dropped dead. He had always intended, for some years, he had intended to come to the United States and to Utah, but he still would have gone through Oxford University had he been able to have his tuition paid. So he didn't, so that brought him to the United States earlier. But there he had this marvelous education and was ready to matriculate to Oxford.
But to get back to your question, still in line with what we're talking about here, Tom Jessup's mother came from a very well-to-do, noble family in England. And when she married beneath him, they were almost cut off. They lived in the
Caretaker's cottage.
Caretaker's cottage, and
on her father's estate.
Father was a gardener for a tremendous area there. But when they joined their church in England, Tom Jessup now we're talking about, and his family, she all of a sudden went to church, and there was an organ there. And this second mother went over and played that organ for the first time since she was forced out of her home, so to speak, by her father.
In his story, Kim.
What I was very much impressed about is really basically the immigrant story. What all of us in the United States are immigrants to one degree or another. So all three of these books have a very strong message for all of us to look back over what one family did, and it always makes you want to, I think these books are motivators for everyone to go out and really do more of their family genealogy or their family history. But there are universal aspects of the books that I really enjoy. I want to get back to the idea of the role of the woman, which is in all three of the books, the role of the woman is not negated. It's not these aren't stories of the politics of the rich and famous, you might say. These books are really down to earth, and they bring out what life was really like in a class society, in a immigrant society. And the things I find in these books that are universal today, I think you've still got the power of the family, the power of hard work, the power of honesty. These things don't go out of style. Do you find that these weren't things that just were written? Your mother believed these truths.
Definitely.
And are you happy with the way they've been communicated out in these books?
Oh, we've been delighted. I don't think my mother is bothering me in my dreams anymore. I got them published.
And although they've been they've been a wonderful tribute to their family, what I think they are definitely something that anyone, whether they know the Bignell family, would be. These are good reads for anyone that's interested.
With respect to that, the third book is on a Mormon missionary, but people from all religious groups sent missionaries to the South Seas. And Fred Yates, that'd be my grandfather, was able to communicate with all those people. And when he left the islands after 3.5 years, natives came from far away as 1,000 miles to bring him shells to say goodbye. Religious leaders of 8 or 9 different religions came to say goodbye. And speaking
French
about
officials.
What?
French officials.
Right, French officials. Everybody came to see
And the
him
ship's
off.
captains. The harbor was filled with ships and boats of all descriptions there in Tahiti when he went to leave. All came from far away to say goodbye to Fred Yates.
And talking about medicine, he prayed over everybody of every religion down there. They called him, the Catholics called him in when they got sick people. Everybody else did. It really made me. I've still got a book of medicine in the South Seas. It's about that thick, but he must have known it. But he don't only have medicine, which they respected. He had the power of prayer. He was really a healer. He all through his life he prayed for people when they got ill, and but people from all religions down there called him in. It really amazed me the power he had.
Just every time we do this program, something comes up that we learn from it, and also it just triggers some of our thinking. Today, here in 2005, we talk a lot about diversity and recognizing diversity and celebrating, appreciating it, but it's not something just now. You just gave a beautiful example of another time when people of different religions had appreciation for one another and celebrated. So I think that note is really important. My question is going to be a rather personal one to both of you. And Kim talked some about this too, that going back and knowing your roots. And there's been a lot in the last 30 or 40 years in particular where people have become more appreciative of where did I come from, what's the family roots, and what's our culture, and particularly in our country where we have so many people from all over the world. From doing these books and editing them from your mother's work, what has it meant to both of you? And what did you learn that you take with you that's helpful? And I guess I think the panel's been saying this too, and that is encouraging others to. Everybody's not going to do books like this, but they certainly can learn about their history. What's it meant to you? How's it changed you? How's it affected you in any way?
One of the things I like to speak before Let goes on is how it's affected all the members of my mother's families. Probably 200 to 300 of the mothers went to relatives from those families, and they're getting them. And all they say is that you've saved my family history, Bliss.
And your mother, you thank her for that, of course.
That's right.
Yeah, but you and Annette it wouldn't have happened without you, though, because she had passed on. Annette?
Well, I remember a pillow that Bliss's mother had embroidered. It was a fairly simple one. I come of goodly stock. And then it had a brief genealogical chart of that. And after reading these books, she did indeed come from goodly stock.
Yeah. The other little footnote I would make that's really important about your particular religion, the Latter-day Saints and the community, your roots are very important. Studying family history has been very much part of the religion. And so probably of all religions in this country, you probably have the best background of history of families. I've talked to other members of the faith that have spent a lot of time doing research in Utah. I'm going to pause here before I go back to the panel and have them put up a telephone number, because we've done almost 2 shows and everybody's going to say, well, where are these books at? And
In my office.
And they're in your office. But if they would put up the phone number, and Liz, if you just give them that phone number again, too. It's area code 208, of course.
Right.
And
664-9278.
once again, 664.
9278.
And it's gone up on the screen, so they could call you and you can give them information.
I'll be glad to sell them books any day.
Okay. With that, back to Janelle.
We're trying to get them distributed by national
Sure.
distributor right now, but that may be more difficult than I think. But
Okay.
that's our hope, that it will be picked up, and so people from all over the United States and the world can see them.
Thank you, Janelle Berg.
Tony said he was going to ask you a personal question, and I'm going to follow up on that and say I'll ask you a personal question as well. For each one of you, and let's start with Annette, do you have a favorite story that was one that just particularly connects with you from these books, something that really inspires you? And if she can't think of...
Well, yeah, because overall, they really are inspiring.
There are many stories,
Yes,
I'm sure.
and the interesting thing is, although this is about all these generations of LDS people, there isn't that too much mention of the religion, really. Even when he's over there in the islands and trying to convert the natives, there isn't that much mention. So you're not feeling as though you're reading a prayer book there. You're not at all. I think perhaps the young boy and what he did from age 8 to 18, 10 years as a very young boy, how much he accomplished, what a tremendous background he had. He also was a naturalist because his benefactor was a naturalist and taught him everything about that and so on. So besides being ready to matriculate there at Oxford University, he was a naturalist.
So
In
he's
10
one
years,
of
he was only 18 years old and he had all this background behind him.
And Bliss, what about you? Is there a favorite character or a
something
favorite story?
did come, and it came out of the second mother who got hired by Hooper, the congressional representative. This is one thing I did discuss with my mother, because I lived in Washington, D.C. for about 10 years during the time she was doing this to a certain extent. So I was very interested in the fact that Mormons weren't able to vote during the time he was representative because of the polygamy issue. He went back there as a congressional representative, non-Mormon, and there's one thing that he did. He supported the Mormons and every time they were being attacked in Congress, which was quite often in those days, because polygamy was still a big issue in this country as morally wrong. Probably still is today. But at any rate, the relationship between his wife, who he later married, and the congressional representative was absolutely amazing. And all of the work I've done in government, and worked in government and so forth, I didn't find many more interesting tales than the relationship that man had to Tom Jessup's wife as a young girl and so forth.
She was the second of the mothers, the three mothers.
Yes, and she actually went to Washington, D.C.
Yes.
with
Yes, she
him,
did,
worked
She
in
was
his
the
home.
nursemaid to Captain Hooper's children.
And so she did a great deal of traveling, and then she came back and, of course, later on had her family.
Right.
We're talking about Captain William Hooper,
That's
Hooper, as the territory's congressional representative. On my mother's side, my grandmother was a Hooper, so
Oh, for goodness
Oh, is
sake.
that right?
seemed like some connection there. With that,
Yeah.
Kim,
It's amazing how many people who are non-Mormons they're reading this book because we're in South Africa.
Kim.
The power of the books maybe would be that they would motivate, and this is what I always enjoy about books. When you get done reading them, are you going to look into further information on the topics covered in these books? And I would say, especially with the Western Argonaut, anyone interested in Western history would enjoy that book and the study of how the state of Utah evolved. I would think for Mormons and non-Mormons alike, it's an excellent piece of
Well, I
lays
don't
the
know-
foundation for an
I
excellent
don't know whether I
study.
can outdo Stephen Ambrose as a transcontinental railroad or not in this thing. No, but I would mention this. There's one thing that we really are seriously thinking about. My mother was a poet. There's a couple of poems in the third book
Of hers, yeah.
of hers, and she used her pen name Mangariba on the bottom of them. But she must have about 50 or 60 poems. They're very outstanding. And we're thinking about putting them together as a fourth book. But that's probably what we'll be. And it'll take me a little while to sell what I've got already before I start worrying about railroad history.
Well,
They're excellent pieces of work. I enjoyed reading them.
Thank you.
that was my question along that same lines, is that you've put these three books together, and again, we want to honor Reva Yates Bignall, your mother, Bliss, and because it's her work, and
right.
and you've made that really clear with me in previous discussions that you and Annette were to put it together and to edit it, and Annette on one of the books, you had to put it in different
Quite a bit
cants.
of editing, yeah.
And what people don't know about you, that's your field, and I've known Annette for over 30 years, and you're excellent with English and foreign language. You understand the structure of languages, and so that you contributed a very valuable part to this. But my question is, in addition to the poems, do you have other works of hers and transcripts that could be in a book other than the poetry, or did you pretty much exhaust it with these three?
I don't.
Okay.
The only one thing was that the prologue that you came across, or the
Right.
preface that she'd written
On
for
Western
Western
Frontiers. I
Argonaut.
just found that the other day, and I've been passing out to people who've got it. Rather an interesting deal about it, because that tells about her really going to write this story when she's only in high school. She had these goals long before then.
If you publish the book of poetry, I'm sure you'll find a way of putting that there as a kind of a footnote to these one.
We had one little story involving a dog story. My younger brother, it's about 16 pages long. It's quite interesting. Yeah. I'm sure we'll be adding that to the poetry, and maybe we'll be adding a few other things to tie in our present family.
Well, it's amazing to watch how she understood the importance of a history of a family. And so, again, we thank both of you for being here. We thank our panel. And Kim, thank you for visiting with us as a panelist. You did a wonderful job. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed these two programs as much as we've enjoyed bringing them to you. Books and preserving history are really very, very important to all of us. And next week, we're going to move to yet another subject, as we do from time to time, and we hope you'll be with us that time. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.